Yo, what up? Gabriel here. Coming at you with another tier list video. I gotta be honest, I can't get enough of this type of shit. So here I am doing another one. This time I put together a little list. I'll put a link in the description where you can make your own as well. Or just look at the one I end up creating here. And it's just a list of the uncommon rarity banner units in Monster Train. Just to clarify, that's going to be any of the banner units, aka priority draw units, the ones that you find on the map, the ones that you find in unit drafts, that have the little blue dot in the middle, not the purple dot. There's only two rarities of banner units. There are the uncommon and the rare. And unlike spells, rare banner units actually are kind of rare in the game, so I thought it would be more useful and maybe just a little bit better use of time to only go over the uncommon ones, because these are the ones that you're going to see the most throughout any run. You know, you'll have a pretty good chance of seeing any one of these per each clan if you're going to target that. Like if you're specifically going to target that clan's banners, you're probably going to see some of these come up. You know, all these ones here. So, and I will say this is mostly for just, you know, fun. But if you are a newer player and you're looking to this as kind of a guide on which units you can take, pay less attention to what I say is D tier and maybe C tier. They're not necessarily bad units. It's just that I don't really find use for them. I have played this game long enough, put in enough hours to realize that almost every unit in this game can be pretty good, and really a lot of it just comes down to playstyle. But what I will say to the new players is you can be pretty confident that the things I put in S and A are definitely good units. So if you find yourself not taking those units or skipping them a lot or just not having them perform well, you could probably take a look at this and reevaluate your situation. And I'll try to give little, brief explanations on why I put each unit there, right? And as far as how I weight this, I'm weighting it on pretty much everything. It's a little bit ambiguous, I'm not going to lie, but I will say I'm looking really both at the floor, the ceiling, and kind of the median that you're going to get from these units. So S tier, those are going to be units that you will pretty much always want to see on any run, and regardless of, maybe in very niche situations you don't want to see them, but in a general sense you almost always want to see these units. And then A tier, there's a little more situational stuff going on, but they're still just consistently very good. Then B is like, we're getting a little more situational. It's either situational or they're just solid but never really that great. Then C is like, they can be great, but they're pretty situational. And then D is almost always, I would say, I just never use them. And as far as how I weight it, I mainly think of just how the unit itself performs. And that factors in like your common upgrades that you would find on them, the common infusions you might be able to put into them, bonus points if they have a good self-infusion, because those are always going to be there. And also, I'll dock points sometimes if it's like a very specific upgrade they need to be useful. And also, I'll give a little bit of weight, not a whole lot of weight, but a little bit of weight to if the unit itself has a good essence. You know, if you pick the unit, you end up not using it, is it still going to be a good essence? I think that's worth weighting a little bit into the stuff here. But it's not going to, a bad essence won't keep it out of S tier, let's put it that way. So let's begin. I'm going to go right down the list on kind of best to worst, in my opinion. So the first on the list we have here, Animus of Wind, aka Animus of Will. Now, a lot of these cards in the S tier, a lot of them can kind of serve dual purposes. You know, they can either tank or spank. Spank being, a backline damage dealer. Usually kind of a glass cannon like Animus of Will here, or just kind of a utility unit. Animus of Will is not really one of them. It is very specific in what it does. It's really just meant to be your spank. It's not going to be your tank, and it's not some utility unit. It is your primary focus, the primary thing you want to put all of your damage, spells on, and scaling. it's meant to carry you from the back line and deal damage, massive amounts of damage. Now, why do I think this is the best uncommon banner unit in the game, even though it only fills one role? Well, I think it fills that role better than any other unit on this list. On a floor, on a average, and I would even argue at the ceiling. On top of that, more so than any unit in this entire list, it is the least dependent on getting any specific upgrade. It can make use of literally anything. It can make use of the large stone, it can make use of quick, it can make use of additional multi-strike. It also, unlike almost every unit on this list, can make use of just a plus 10 or just these 25 gold little stat bumps. Honestly, you could spend 50 gold, just put 2 battle stones into this thing, and it's good. I can't think of too many other units on this list that would give you S tier quality for just, 2 battle stones. Now, of course, we're assuming that, let's say you have some rage imps, or a ritual battle. You're obviously slapping it on this thing as a baseline. It doesn't do anything, but I could say that of almost every card. I'm assuming you're gonna be pouring, damage buffs into this card during the fights. Otherwise, there's not much use. But yeah, it's just a ridiculous card. 3 strikes. It's so powerful. Nothing else really comes close. And I also might add that I find that it's a fine self-infusion. It starts with 3 damage. You may or may not upgrade that from the base stats, but if you don't, you basically play nothing to get an extra multi-strike. And I'll even add, so it's a good self-infusion, but it's also a good infusion into the other stuff if you don't end up using Animus for whatever reason. If maybe you just found a better situation for some of their unit and you want to add multi-strike to it. I think it's the most underrated essence in the game. The general sense I see is that people basically like it the least of all the multi-strike giving essences. I'm exactly the opposite. I like it the most of all the multi-strike giving essences. I think minus 15 damage is by far the least downside of any of them. Some of these other ones, it's like they give you fragile. Some of them give you the requirement to fuel yourself. Some of them give you even like, not pictured here, but Eelgorgon, an additional Ember. I think that's similar on the same level, but it's at least as far as the uncommon ways to get multi-strike, I don't think you can beat the Animus of Will essence. So all in all, it's just such a consistent unit. I prefer it to the sweepers. I think I'm in the minority there as well, but I think it gives you basically the same benefit you're going to get from the sweepers as far as clearing the waves. But it is way better at killing big tanks and way better at killing mini bosses and way better into the relentless rounds. So, and it also doesn't, some of those sweepers really do need multi-strike to shine. Animus Will doesn't. I think Animus Will is the best banner unit, and it may be even better than the rares. I know there's a lot of high rolly type rares, but I just don't know. There's just not really any situation where Animus Will isn't going to be great for you. And then very close behind that, I'm going to say Paraffin Enforcer. This card can just carry almost any Melting Remnant run. I mean, maybe there exists a run where you don't find any Burnout Extension and any Reform at all. That's pretty heavy, pretty low rolly of a Cursed Seed, but if that happens, yeah, sure, you don't want Paraffin Enforcer then, but majority of the time, think of all, like there's 3 cards in the uncommon tier, the common tier for melting that give Burnout Extension. There's 1 at the common tier that reforms. Half the time you're getting primitive molds instead of drags. And also, if you have the Rector champ, you might just get Dark Calling. There's a lot of ways to make this work. Plus, there's, there's Wax and Spike. There's other ways to get Reform. And there's also Lady of the Reform. A lot of ways to get Burnout Extension to work for you. And getting 3 Rage on Strike is just ridiculous. It's a good essence into itself, similar to Animus of Will, very good self-infusion. You know, you get 6 rage to the whole floor on strike. 12 damage minimum. Kind of ridiculous. But it's also just pretty good onto other units too. You know, you put it onto a sweeper, if you got a burnout floor, you're getting a stack of 3 burnout or 3 rage per unit hit. That's pretty ridiculous. I don't know. I think it's pretty hard to beat Paraffin Enforcer. This just the knowledge of how powerful this card is has really turned around my Melting Remnant stats. Particularly the drag variant, which I was struggling with a lot. I'm still not a savant or anything at that, but I will say whenever I see Paraffin Enforcer, I can almost always make it work. Been a while since I couldn't make Paraffin Enforcer work. It's just a god tier card. I almost debated putting it above Animus of Will, but I think it's just a little easier to make Animus of Will work. But it's still certainly not that hard to make Paraffin Enforcer work. Now the next on the list might be, I suspect, a lot of people's number 1. It's my number 3. That's going to be Husker. I think it's by far the best sweeper in the game, simply because it has a bunch of health. You know, it has a huge edge on every other sweeper on this list. 15 is the highest, so it has double the health of the next highest sweeper on here, which is Cold Kalia. We're not factoring Glareminder here, but even Glareminder has less health, it has 20. And, you know, to boot, it technically has the highest starting damage of all the sweepers, which really, I don't know. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but maybe ring 1 and 2, or ring 2, I guess, wouldn't be ring 1, but ring 2 it might be a big deal if you haven't found anything to put damage on it yet. Or even if you found it, you might not just draw it in time for the actual fight. But yeah, all in all, it's, you know, it does what a sweeper does. It attacks everything on the floor. But unlike Animus, I think you really, to really make it work, you're going to have to get multi-strike. If you're not going to get multi-strike, you're going to need some other parts to make it work. You're going to need some sort of pretty fast and high-end damage scaling, or alternatively, some sort of stall, like some roots, or just something additional supplemental damage. But, you know, nice thing about Husk over the other sweepers is you can, if you find, say, both multi-strike and quick at the Merchants of Steel, you can safely take both of those because you start with 30 health. You know, the other sweepers will pretty much die to spikes at their low health totals, and you basically are having to dedicate some form of defense, usually in the form of a 25 health upgrade at the Merchants, but you know, there's other ways to do that, but generally that's the situation I find myself in. So Husk has a pretty big advantage over the sweepers in that sense. But at the end of the day, most of the sweepers often just round down to being a sweeper, and Husk just gets the edge for those little things that it has. You know, it has the extra health. It doesn't need to slot a upgrade slot to health. One negative, I would say, of it is its essence pretty much sucks. 30 health. It's usable, but it is nowhere near like a lot of the other essences on this list. But yeah, that's Husk Hermit. Now, speaking of another unit that's a great unit on its own, but doesn't really have that good of an essence, boom, Rail Beater. I don't know how many people might have expected it to be this high on the list, but I'm pretty confident in this. You know, this is the first unit on this list that I say basically can fit every role and do it well. It can be an incredible tank. It can be an incredible spank. It can do both at once. And it can also just be a utility unit, just there to add melee weakness to your backliner. So it can do all of that, and it does it well. You know, if it's going to be your main damage dealer, I would say you probably need some multi-strike. I will say that. So it has that not going for it. But here's the thing. You'd be surprised. And also keep in mind, it's probably the #1 easiest unit to make One Horn Tome work on. It starts with 30 initial armor minimum. You know, that's a pretty easy situation for Fragile. You know, you're only giving up 10 HP for Fragile. That's really not much of a price to pay. And then you're putting multi-strike on a unit that basically for every multi-strike it gains, you can almost think of it as gaining 1.5 multi-strikes. Because it applies the melee weakness, right? The first hit won't be good, but every hit after that does double damage. So, I don't know. It's just pretty crazy how much damage these things can put out, both by itself, but also just for the unit behind it, if there is a unit behind it. Like I said, it doesn't have to be a frontliner. It can be a backliner. It can be everything. It's also a great one where, like, if you do find an early multi-strike, it's tanky enough that you can basically just hellvent it and have 2 of them on the floor, and then maybe you scale it with an endless fledgling up. That's usually enough to win a run. And then you just sort of open everything up from there. If you find yourself needing defense, you try to add a little defense. If you find yourself needing a little more offense, you can add some pip, fit 2 of those fledgling imps on. A lot of ways you can go from there. All of these units are my most winning units, by the way. These 4 right here, and there's a little bit of a drop off after that. But like I said, similar Husk, its essence is not good. It is a little bit better than Husks, though, I would say, for 2 reasons. One is it's a very good essence into Apex Imp, and 2 is it's a pretty decent essence if you find yourself needing to make One Horn Tome work. It's pretty good for that. And then the next on this list is the next Awoken Sweeper, Shattered Shell. Some might put this above Husk, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with them. I mean, it has probably the best effect of the sweepers, other than maybe Siliphyte, but while Siliphyte technically has a great effect, you have to set up bottom or mid to make it work, which to me is very non-ideal. I almost always want to set up top. So really, if we're thinking of top floor setups, the best effect is the Slay trigger on the Shattered Shell. The Shattered Shell is just, yeah. Now, really quick, I'm going to have to pause the recording and come back to it. All right, check. All right, back at it. So where were we? Shattered Shell? Yeah, I mean, it's essentially same as Husk, except significantly less health. At 10 health, like I said, usually you're going to have to add some health to it somehow. Whether that's through the upgrade of 25 health, or just spells / infusions, you're going to have to do it or you're going to die to spikes, unless you're very confident that you can kill the spikes. Also, if you're setting up top, I mean, unless you know you can just sap or daze Divinity right from the start, you also need help, some initial health for that. So it has those downsides. That's why I rank it as lower than Husk. But it's still a sweeper. It's very good at dealing damage. It's probably the best at dealing damage of the sweepers because of that Slay effect. So it's very good. It might seem like I'm negatively bashing it, but that I'm not. I'm basically just justifying why Husk I think is better. Really, at the end of the day, it's a very incredible unit. Still in the S tier. I think you're never sad to see it. Just if they're offered side by side, I'm pretty much always going Husk. And then the next on the list is our first, and spoiler alert, only Stygian uncommon tier, or uncommon rarity banner unit that I'm putting in the S tier. Some might argue Titan Sentry should be in there. I could see that, but I'll get to that later. I think Siren of the Sea is generally the most desirable of these Stygian units. I think it has prior to the DLC, I would say both Sirens were very similar in how desirable they were. But now I would say Siren of the Sea has a very big edge over Nameless. Nameless isn't bad per se, but it's definitely not something I'm that crazily excited to see. Similar to what I was saying with the sweepers, the Nameless Siren, it has 10 health. It basically has to slot either an infusion or a upgrade slot in order to deal with defense, whereas Siren of the Sea doesn't. Siren of the Sea, you can get away with just going on with offensive stuff. You could double multi-strike, you could multi-strike and quick. Those are all fine because she incants 2 health per incant. Also, a very good self-infusion. The self-infusion on Nameless doesn't really do anything other than help your damage scale more, but the Sirens helps you basically be tanky and deal a lot of damage. I also find just the essence of Siren of the Sea is a lot more useful than the Nameless Siren essence as well. It's really nice and versatile to get that health, helps deal with all the plethora of spikes, might make it so you don't have to slot whatever unit you're putting it into with that 25 health. Gives you a way to set up top because you can outscale the sweep defensively while also providing offensive scaling. I think it's just generally the most desirable incant unit, Siren of the Sea. Dare I say it's even better than Eelgorgon. Though I'll usually take Eelgorgon just because it's Eelgorgon and yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to beat Siren of the Sea. It can tank, similar to the Rail Beater, it fills either the tank or the spank role perfectly fine, and it can do both at once too. Put an armor incant on it, put a multi-strike on it, self-infuse it, now you're getting 5 defensive stats for every incant, along with 3/6, however you want to look at it, offensive stats every incant. Put 2 of them on a floor, and that should be enough to get you through. And the final unit that I'm putting in the S tier here is Steelworker. Now this was one I had debated on if it was S or A tier. Certainly the essence is A tier. Here's the reason why I'm leaving the unit itself also in the S tier. When I looked at my data going all the way back to when the DLC dropped, there's only one unit that I've picked a significant amount of times that has never lost a run for me, and that's Steelworker. Every unit here I've lost runs with them, even though I pick them a ton. I don't lose a whole lot with them, but I've lost. Whereas Steelworker literally has no losses. I am 18-0 with Steelworker as, a unit. I will say often the goal is not to use him as a unit. Like, I wouldn't go in planning to use him as a unit typically. I really do think his essence is where he shines, but like a lot of these S tier units, very good self-infusion. But it just works as a unit on its own. Its base stats aren't great, but its effect is. And that effect is always going to be useful. It's going to be good in almost every situation, but it particularly shines in an overstack situation, which is very easy to do with Hellhorn. By far the easiest clan to overstack with. And, Steelworker really, you get a few of these on a floor, and you will never die. You're going to get ridiculous amounts of armor, and any sort of armor synergies that can work in your advantage now become very viable and easy to work out. And that's pretty much Steelworker. I mean, there's not much else to say. It just, it gives a ton of armor. The more you can fit on a floor. It's also insane with Apex Imp, either infusing it into Apex Imp or just having it on the floor with some Apex Imps. Absolutely insane. So that's what I'm considering A tier, S tier. And those are the units I think that you pretty much always want to see. Now you might this unit I could probably justify the end of S tier. However, I don't think this unit, Titan Sentry, quite carries the runs the way that the S tier ones do. Now, don't misunderstand what I'm saying there. Titan Sentry is often a big reason of why you won, but it alone can't really do it. Whereas, facetious, if I'm being facetious, nothing on its own can win, right? But these ones can just sit on a floor and just be what they are and carry the run for you. Titan Sentries, I would say, is more of a utility unit in what its best role is, which is to basically sit at the bottom, be endless, and deal out a ton of frostbite damage for pretty minimal investment. And it does that well. You will not really have to worry about AoE if you have one of these on endless. But on that note, it kind of requires endless to be worthy of this S or A tier. So when I value it at the A tier, I'm saying, there are runs where you won't find endless, and if that's the case, it's more of, I would say, like a C tier unit. It's a tank. It has okay tank stats, but if it were just a tank that's on your floor, not being endless and just trying to sort of be the tank of the floor, it only does an okay job at that, in my opinion. There's not a whole lot about it other than its initial 35 health that make it much of a tank. It doesn't really scale. The scaling it provides is just frostbite, which also is not good on the top floor, typically. I will also say this unit particularly needs to be self-infused, which is not a problem, right? But it's something I just should say for people that might not do that well with Titan Sentry. You're probably not self-infusing it. Self-infuse this, it literally doubles the value, gives it a little bit of extra health. You get that thing on Endless, you will not have to worry about Shade Wings or anything like that for the rest of your run. But the ideal upgrades here, 25 health and Endless. That's really the gold standard. You could also do Large Stone. Large Stone and Endless is also not too bad. And that's Titan Sentry. Like, I could see it being listed in the S tier just for how much value it provides, but like I said, it just doesn't, it's not you need other parts. Like, I can win with all of these S tier units and nothing else other than, spells and stuff. I can't win with Titan Sentry and nothing else. I do need other units other than Titan Sentry. Hopefully that makes sense. It's the only reason it's not an S tier. And the next one I also was thinking of putting in S tier, Awoken Hollow. The only reason I am not doing it is because it has some situations where it's not S tier worthy. Mainly when you have root seeds and just not many cultivate procs. I find you'll generally, even with root seeds, be able to use it though. But if you haven't found any cultivate procs, it can be awkward. Like, if you go, let's say you take this unit and then you try to commit to it before you found any cultivate, or even just like one cultivate proc, you might go a few rings without finding any heal, and then it's pretty bad in that situation, I would say. So probably not worthy of the S tier just because of that. But I gotta tell you, data-wise, it actually fits right in with those top 3 units in my data, at least on the latest one with the win streak. It's actually even better than Husk. It's undefeated, of course, and I've used it almost as much as I've used Animus of Will and Paraffin Enforcer. That just shows that how consistent it really can be, If you have restores, take it. And outside of the really good champs like Spine Chief and Firelight, I'd say you're better off in most cases just to abandon your champ at that point, unless it's a backlining champ like Brawler Prince or something. But like, let's say you already have an Animus of Will, and then you see the Awoken Hollow, and your champ's something kind of mediocre like Wildenton or Sentient or Penumbra, or I don't know, name whatever that basically isn't Spine Chief or Little Fade. I think in that case, just forget your champ and build a floor that is Animus of Will and Awoken Hollow. That's your floor now. Awoken Hollow points his little vines at you and says, "Look at me, I'm the champ now." But seriously, also you're gonna want to take a pip upgrade at that first Ring 3 reward if you have the Awoken Hollow already, because your plan really should be to self-infuse this thing. It's similar to Titan Sentry. It is significantly better self-infused. You now go from your your starter card Restore as an example. You heal for 2, and then it procs a regen proc. That's 2 cultivates. Well, without the self-infusion, that is 4/4 of stats, pretty good, but with the self-infusion, it jumps up to 8/8 of stats. So, significantly better. It does cost you a pip to do that, though, so you are going to have to take that pip upgrade, but I think it's totally worth it. It's pretty hard to lose with an Animus of Will, a self-infused Awoken Hollow, and a bunch of Cultivate procs. Very, very hard to lose from that position. I haven't lost from that position in my latest run. Let's put it that way. It's been accounted for so many wins. Doesn't have to be Animus of Will either. Any backliner will do, Horned Warrior, Sweepers, whatever. Speaking of Horned Warrior, that's the next on this list, which just goes to show how valuable Multi-Strike is, because you compare it to Animus of Will, and it's pretty significant step down. Like the starting stats are a little bit better on Horned Warrior. You get 2 extra health and a bit of extra damage, but for the most part, it's essentially the same. Sorry, the stats are, not the actual utility of the unit. I think Animus has a better also essence. Not that the Horned Warrior essence is all that bad. I think it's a little underrated of an essence as well. Any essence that gives Multi-Strike is a good essence. Let's put it that way. But it's, significantly harder to pull off Fragile than it is to just pull off minus 15 damage. Now, all this being said, you'll notice all of the units so far, only 2 have Multi-Strike. This is the second one now that has Multi-Strike. Because really, there's no downside to the Multi-Strike here. There's a lot of there's some other units on here that get Multi-Strike, like Alloy and the Kinhost Vessel. But they have a significant cost associated with what you have to pay to get that Multi-Strike. Alloy has to frontline and it has to gorge. It also costs 2 Ember. And Kinhost Vessel has 8 shards you got to get through, or echoes you got to get through. Those are significant prices to pay to get Multi-Strike. So the fact that this has really no downside other than just kind of poor starting stats makes it a very good unit. We know how powerful Multi-Strike is, and the fact it just gets it makes it a very, very solid backliner. But really not much to say other than that's that much different than Awoken or Animus of Will. It's just supposed to sit in the back and do damage. Similar to Animus of Will, it doesn't necessarily require specific upgrades to shine, though I will say it wants Multi-Strike a little more than Animus does. At just 1 Multi-Strike, you'd like to have that 3rd hit for sure. I think the difference between 2 to 3 hits is a bit bigger than the difference between 3 to 4 hits, so a little bit more reliant on Multi-Strike, but doesn't rely on it as much as some of the single strikers do. So that's Horned Warrior. And then next on this list, Keeper of Echoes. I think if you'd have asked me, let's just go ahead and put these both up anyway. They're very similar. I didn't know which one should go first here. We'll just say they're equal. Keeper of Echoes and the Bog Host, or Bogfly Egg. Who knows what the real name is? It's a Bogfly Egg. But if you had asked me maybe 2 months ago, I might have had these in S tier. I think my general evaluation of Wormkin banners has gone down a bit as of recent. I'm not really as high on them as I used to be. They're still okay. I mean, they're better than Umbra, but I don't know. I don't think they're super great. They're good, but not great, I feel. So Keeper of Echoes, it has that steep 2 Ember cost to get out, which definitely works against it. I do think maybe if it was 1 Ember cost, it could jump into S tier, but the 2 cost, it ends up hurting you enough that it is worth noting that it costs 2 Ember. It also has pretty poor starting stats, so it can be just a little awkward to figure out what Keeper of Echoes is supposed to be on any given run. Is it just a utility totem on the floor? Is it a tank? Is it your actual damage dealer that you want to put multi-strike on? It's hard to suss that out sometimes, and sometimes you end up committing to one of those and it ends up not being the right call just based on what happened in the run, and then you're in an awkward position where it's like, okay, what am I going to do with this unit now? I will say it has a pretty good essence, though. It's basically online with the Siren of the Sea essence. It gives you some initial stats and just gives it its effect to the unit itself. I think Inspire, if you're building a Wormkin deck properly, can generally trigger as much, if not more, than a incant deck typically can. So it's got a pretty good essence, but unlike Siren of the Sea, it's hard to really say why, but I just don't find the self-infusion is that good. And, like I said, I don't know why. It just doesn't end up feeling that powerful. Maybe that's just variance on what it's been like the runs I've done that, but I don't know. It just doesn't feel like S tier to me. I've been avoiding Wormkin banners compared to basically everything except Umbra. If it's Umbra and Wormkin, I'll go for Wormkin, but otherwise, I would much rather have Awoken banners, for instance, Hellhorn banners, even Stygian banners, and Melting, of course. So I really do think Wormkin, it's saved by these two units here, but everything else I think is pretty kind of mediocre to poor as far as the banner units go. But yeah, so we kind of talked about Keeper of Echoes there. The egg is, I don't know, maybe the egg should be above Keeper. I will say in my data I've taken Keeper a bit more. It's definitely my most taken Wormkin unit, so I feel like it deserves the slot ahead of it, but the egg is pretty good. I was really high on this egg in particular for a while. I still think it's clearly the best egg. It's probably the best unit, along with Keeper of Echoes for Wormkin. But I don't know. I've had plenty of runs where it just doesn't work. It has obviously the problem that a lot of eggs have. It starts with abysmal stats, 1 and 1, basically. So you have to add health almost all the time. And I guess it has the advantage over the other eggs that it's only five echoes to hatch, but 5 echoes can still be a lot in its certain runs. Like some runs, it's like you have to play a soul crushing guilt at the start in order to set up against divinity. Then it's like it might take a little bit for it to hatch, especially if you need to do that and maybe hatch another thing. Especially if you're not running Marsh Lord or you don't get any other really good hatching related cards or artifacts. Endless Egg can still be awkward even with the low echo count here. I've had some awkward Endless. It is definitely the easiest to pull Endless Egg or Burnout Egg off, but it can still be awkward if you don't find the right parts. So I do find it's a little less consistent than what I see in the S tier cards. But all that being said, it's still a very good card. If you're playing Wormkin, these are the two units I would look for. You know what? Why don't we move the egg ahead? I think it is better than Keeper of Echoes. If I were to see both right together, I'd probably choose the egg. So let's give the egg a little nod here. But yeah, it does have, big advantages that it can basically double dip from stat upgrades when you pour them into it before it hatches. If you can hit a razor sharp edge on it, it'll upgrade both the flies that basically come out. Same thing with any of Echo Transfer, Echo Infusion, added health, added damage, and kind of double dips there. That's an advantage it has over all the other eggs. Infusion wise, it works with almost every infusion. If you're going endless, I would recommend Kinhost Carapace Infusion. You're going to get 10 ton on every hatch and play of it. So that's pretty good. It can also just be good in general. Even outside of Endless Egg, it's going to give you 20/20 worth of stats. Not insanely good, but it's good. But yeah, it also allows you to kind of pseudo go over the pip limit if you put a few of these down and then hatch them. Wormkin loves wide floors. These two units, by the way, combo pretty well together in that sense. If you're able to hatch these eggs, you probably have a lot of Inspire triggers. And if you can get a wide floor, 4 to 6 of those flies, and then a keeper, or 2 if you run 4 flies, you'll get a lot of scaling at that point, and that's a pretty good situation to be in. Next on the list, I think a lot of people that are into Wormkin probably will have issues with me not putting this in the S tier. And I couldn't argue against them. I definitely see how this unit could be S tier. Just for me, for me personally, I think I'm a bit just bad at Harvest in general as a mechanic. It's one of my weaker points. You can't be good at everything. And Harvest tends to be something I don't really navigate as well as I should. So I think if you can navigate a Harvest deck very well, it's clearly an S tier unit for you. I mean, it gets you just really stupidly good stats in Harvest. But for me, 3/3 in Harvest is really good, but I find it just I don't know. It's nice because it can fill every role. It can be your tank. It can be your spank. It can do both at once, just like Rail Beater. But you do have to have the setup for it. You can't just only be killing enemies. You got to be sacrificing friendlies as well. So it's not always gonna work out super well, I feel. And maybe it's just variance, but a lot of times I've just taken the unit and it hasn't really wowed me. That being said, though, it'd feel wrong to really let it fall much further down the list, because it's such a good unit in a general sense, right? It also has a pretty good infusion. 2/2 on Harvest, almost the whole, it's 2/3 of the whole effect of the unit. But the downsides, I'd say, I think it's still, if it's gonna be your damage dealer, it's reliant on multi-strike. It also doesn't necessarily, if I'm playing a Melting Remnant, I'll usually just abandon Wickless Baron if Paraffin Enforcer comes along and I have any way to make Paraffin Enforcer work. I do think that Paraffin Enforcer is that much stronger than Wickless Baron, which was also a reason I felt like it didn't deserve to really be in the same tier as Paraffin Enforcer. But I don't know, it's pretty good. It's and like I said, its essence is very good. It can go into anything. You can put it into the egg. Any unit will like this essence. It's just easy scaling that even if you're not sacrificing friendlies, just killing enemies can be enough scaling there. And then the next unit, it was hard for me to really figure out where to put this one. Shadow Eater. It by far is my best Umbra unit. It's not even close. It's the only Umbra unit I'm even excited to see. Of the uncommon ones, at least. I don't think I'm as high on Alloy as I used to be, / I'm not as high on Alloy as I think a lot of other people are. Spoiler alert, Alloy will not be in my A tier. But I don't know, the way I feel about Shadow Eater is it can carry a run if A, you find Shroud Spike, and you have some way to play it a few times. Ideally, consume remove or consume return would be the best, but there's other ways to make that work, spell chain and whatnot. So that's the first, is Shroud Spike. But also, there's just a lot of infusions that take this unit over the edge. Alpha Fiend, if you can afford the pip upgrade, which, if you're going to make that infusion, you should plan on it, similar to like a Awoken Hollow, because it is that strong. If you weren't aware, the Shadow Eater just has these weird interactions with how its Gorge effect works. It basically counts as strikes, and if you kill them, it counts as slays. So anything that has a slay or a strike trigger as an essence is very good on this unit. So Alpha Fiend, as an example, you gain 5 attack per strike. So every single unit that is hit by your gorge and every morsel that gorges, you're going to get that 5 attack times that onto this unit. And double if you have the double gorge artifact, just to throw that out there. But there's other stuff too. I mean, even just like a branded warrior, you can get the rage on slatier floors, okay. But also, as an essence, I've recently found this one. Its essence isn't that good, but it is actually pretty good on Thorn Hollow. To the point where I'd say it's actually pretty top tier as far as combinations goes. But, we'll get to Thorn Hollow later. But yeah, so those are the situations. Basically, if you have a really good essence to infuse into it, and also, or if you have the Shroud Spike, Shadow Eater will be top tier and will carry a run. Now, outside of that, I don't think it's really all that good. It is basically just AoE at that point that costs a lot of investment to make work. Granted, Umbra sucks at AoE. This literally the only flat AoE they have is Shadow Eater. So in that sense, it might fill a hole that you need. But in that scenario, it's more of a utility unit. And I would put it more toward the C tier at that point. It's 2 Ember, it's 3 Pip, it needs morsels to work. So it's like you need to use cards on it, and you have to draw the right cards. And you have to be on a floor that isn't getting swept, or sometimes even your morsels have attack and they have spikes. So it runs into the same shit that Umbra runs into. So hard to evaluate it. Very swingy unit, I would say, but usually the swing can be in your favor. If it's not, though, it sucks. Well, it doesn't suck. It's just underwhelming. Now we get to the first of the Stygian sweepers. We can put them both up right next to each other because there's really not a huge difference between them, I feel. So stat-wise, they're essentially the same. I think I put Cold Kalia ahead of Siliphites simply because it has 5 more health. Effect-wise, the Siliphites effect is a lot better, but as I mentioned earlier in the video, the spell weakness, the way I play, I'm always wanting to set up top, so that spell weakness is pretty irrelevant. So not only does the Silophite have that 5 health advantage, it typically just, even the 3 Frostbite is another little edge it has over Silophite for me. All that being said, though, they really round down to just being a low-statted sweeper, so they're worse than the Awoken ones, but they're still sweepers, so they're still A tier, I feel. It also gets a little bit of a downgrade in that, Awoken within the clan just, I think, has better ways to make their sweepers scale. Razor Sharp Edge is the most straightforward way. The Shattered Shell has its built-in scaling, also its essence that you could put into the husk. There's root seeds. There's there's lesser scaling that also works, like Steel Enhancer. We won't mention Sharpen because that card is so bad. But and then there's also stuff like the Awoken Hollow. But Stygian doesn't really have anything like that. There's no. It's one of the reasons I don't love Stygian. I don't hate them, but I don't love them because they don't have any cards that actually just apply scaling, really. So the only way within Clan to actually get scaling on your sweepers would be the Siren infusions. And I would even go so far as to say for these sweepers, their stats are so poor that those Siren infusions often aren't enough. So that's why they're definitely, in my eyes, not S tier, while the other sweepers are. I almost even put these in the B tier, if I'm being honest. I do think they are a significant step worse than the other sweepers, But all that being said, they're still sweepers. In a lot of runs, it really doesn't matter whether you had these sweepers or these sweepers. Some examples I might throw out there, like a Firelight run, you really don't care. You're getting a ton of stats pretty easily. The starting stats don't really matter that much in that case. Fledgling Imp Endless type runs, you don't care. Just Rage runs in general, you probably don't care which sweeper you had there. You just care that it was a sweeper. So a lot of times there's not much difference. But the times that there are the differences, the advantage usually goes to these Awoken sweepers. So that's both of them there. I don't know what happened with their graphics, but yeah, no heads on them apparently. So that's the A tier. I think the S and the A tier here are generally just pretty desirable units that will produce a pretty high win rate if you pick them a lot and use them properly, of course. So now we get to the B tier, which I had mentioned is going to be really down to the unit on why it's in the B tier. It's either just sort of lacking a ceiling or lacking a floor, usually. So it's either somewhat situational and that floor can be pretty bad, or it is just like a decent card where the ceiling just isn't there. And of course, my first example here doesn't really cleanly fit into either of those examples, but we got the Kinhost Vessel here, which of course, so this one, comparing it to the other egg, it takes, its disadvantages are that it has 3 more echoes that it takes to hatch it, and also it does not double dip from any stat buffs that you put onto the card. So, if you put a razor sharp, like I said, if you put a razor sharp edge onto this egg, the bogfly egg, before it hatches, you get that benefit to both units that hatch. Well, only one unit hatches from this, so you don't get that double dip bonus either. However, the advantages are that once the unit does hatch, it's a single unit with multi-strike, and it has better stats than these flies. It takes up the same amount of pip, but if you gave it an essence or upgrade like Large Stone, it hurts your floor pip-wise a little less since it's still only one unit that comes out, whereas these flies, say if you put a Shard Soul Carver infusion into it, which increases your pip, well, once they hatch, it'll be 4 pip, versus when this one hatches, it would just be 3 pip in that scenario. Not always relevant, but sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. So, Kinhost Vessel wins out on that front. And, it just has that little reap, which is okay. I find the reap is kind of weak aspect of the unit, but sometimes it's relevant. Earlier game, it can be more relevant, I feel. And then I guess the only other bonus I would say would be that, while the bogfly egg has that double dip advantage early, after it hatches, the advantage goes to this unit, because in this case it's only a single unit that you buff up, versus here you're only going to throw the buffs onto one of the flies that hatch. So if it's like a single target thing like Ritual of Battle will probably get more benefit out of the hatched Kinhost pupae versus the bog flies that hatch, since you can only put that ritual on one of the flies. But yeah, I think all in all of that considered, I generally think the Kinhost pupae is less useful than the bogfly egg. I find that it's just harder to hatch it without some serious support. If you have just kind of your run-of-the-mill Wormkin deck that did not hit on any of the sort of steroid hatcher type scenarios, you're generally looking at leaks with this card, versus you're not really looking at leaks with the flies usually, I feel. But with the Kinhost Vessel, often you leak a lot of damage. It's also harder to pull off the Endless variant with. Not impossible, but much harder. And that's really why it has the step down. But at the end of the day, it is still a multi-striking unit that also has decent stats once it hatches, and it has an okay effect with the reap to the whole floor. But we've compared it to the egg, we can also compare it to the Horned Warrior. I would rather just have my unit out and having multi-strike than having to hatch it. So, you know, I'll give up those extra stats and the reap any day of the week. I'd rather have Horned Warrior typically, unless I have, you know, Marsh Lord or some steroid egg type setup. You know, accelerated incubation and whatnot. Even Soul Siphon I actually find is better than accelerated incubation as far as hatching eggs go. Now the next on the list, Lady of the House. I think this card falls into the it's just solid, very good floor, but just not quite there with the ceiling. It's a very well statted unit that it'll come in and do some serious work early game. Obviously the worst scenario would be that you don't have any burnout extension or reform. Even then I'd argue it does some work early game. I mean, it'll take care of the first 2 waves for sure. But really that's just what the unit is. It comes in with good stats. It doesn't cost much. It's pretty non-awkward to make it work. It's only 2 pip. It's just going to be good. I mean, it has some of the highest stats of any unit, any banner unit at the uncommon tier, with really no downside other than burnout. But the burnouts, at 3 burnout, it's really not too bad. But, you know, there's just, you know, there's nothing else attached to it. You know, it doesn't have multi-strike, sweep, doesn't provide any scaling really. So the ceiling just isn't there. Late game, it can fall off quite often. That being said, though, you can make it work late game just fine, depending on the build. So maybe one day it'll jump into my A tier. Who knows? I think a lot of times what's not captured in my run data are the times where I take it early and remove it later. I wouldn't be surprised if this unit actually does that a lot. It's just hard to quantify because in the run data that is never captured. So it doesn't end up showing up in my ending deck a lot of the time. But I think as a unit, just to get you through the early to mid game, it's hard to beat Lady of the House. Also doesn't really need any particular upgrades to shine. It already comes with good stats, so you don't even have to hit a Merchant of Steel to make it start working for you, or even slap an upgrade on it. You know, like a Ritual of Battle, it doesn't need that. It's already doing 30 or 40 damage, whatever it does. Infusion-wise, it's not bad either, too. It's just a pretty good stat boost with Burnout. I should also mention I don't really like the Kinhost infusion, or the Egg infusion for that matter. And none of the sweepers really have good infusions, but I think the Stygian infusions, the essence I should say, are horrible. Just abysmally bad. But reason I say all that, to catch us back up to here, is Shard Soul Carver has one of the better essences in the game, in my opinion. It is one of those that costs you a pip to do. However, it gives you the full effect on top of good starting stats, that essence does. So it gives you just initial stats while also giving you, a lot of these others that have a similar type trigger, or a similar like rapid fire trigger, shall we say. Inspire and Incant and Harvest are kind of just rapid fire triggers. Sirens, even Wickless Baron, Keeper of Echoes, they all have some sort of a nerf to it in their essence form, but the Shard Soul Carvers doesn't. You get the full 2/2 with the essence, so it really, depending on the unit you put it on, even something like Apex Imp loves this. Or just, a unit with that wants to use One Horn Tome, for example, uses it as well. It's really good with Hellhorned. Good in general, though. It goes well on the eggs. Even though, as I said, once this egg, the Bogfly egg hatches, it would be 4 pip. I don't think that's much of an issue. It's getting pretty crazy, both defensive and offensive scaling at that point, so I don't think you're too sad for that to happen. Now, as a unit, though, I don't think it's incredible. It's not bad, though. I think it is underrated as a unit. I've used it to pretty good... if you think about it, it is one of those units, similar to Railbeater and Wickless Baron, that can just do both at once. It can tank and spank. I think it's better served as a tank that deals damage, though. It really depends on if you're going to find multi-strike or not. I think as the main downside, of course, is that 3-pip. That's what makes it awkward. If it were a 2-pip unit, this would be one of the best units in the game. It'd probably be S tier. Like, it should be at 3-pip for sure. But at 3-pip, admittedly, it's just a little bit awkward to use, especially like Wormkin. There's no way to overstack. There's no way to expand your floor space natively with Wormkin. So, a clan that really wants wide scaling and wide floors, it's hard to justify a Shard Soul Carver in that clan. I think that's why it often just isn't taken. But that's Shard Soul Carver. Really good essence. Maybe not the best unit, but probably underrated as a unit. It still has really good scaling and good initial stats. You can definitely make it work. And then the next one, I could see this one similar to Wickless Baron. Maybe it should be higher up. I just haven't really found myself needing to use her that much, but that could just be variance, because what she does, if you need it, she does it incredibly well. Her stats as a tank are great. 40 or 45 health for 2-pip and 1 ember. Hard to beat that. But also just starts with a nice amount of burnout, and also realistically isn't going to run out of burnout unless you do something weird like stealth the floor. She should be at the front, she should be taking hits, and she really enables those runs where you missed on burnout extension. And even if you hit on it, it can often just make it less awkward. If let's say your only burnout extension is a Wicklash, and it's not a holdover or anything yet or ever, this allows you to still use it as a pretty good scaling card without the fear of your unit just burning out and dying. Lady of the Reformed can enable all of that. So yeah, she's pretty good. Why she's in the B tier, I'll be honest, I don't have a good answer for you, other than I just don't find, in my data, I haven't used her that much. I could easily move her up to A or even S. It just hasn't worked out that way, so it didn't feel right putting her in A or S when she doesn't have nearly the pick rate that all of these other A and S tier units have. And even the B tier, like, she's one of the lower picked of my B tiers, but it certainly felt wrong to put her in the C tier, so that's just kind of how she's landed in the B tier for now. The next on the list is Nameless Siren. Maybe I'm doing her dirty here, but like I said, I think she's fallen off a bit in the DLC. Still pretty good. The ceiling is there. The ceiling is quite good, but the floor is not so great. If you don't find multi-strike, she's pretty bad. It's a single striking unit that sure scales pretty well, but you're just killing one unit and there's no other utility provided by it. Unlike Siren of the Sea, it's not like creating a big health buffer. Even sometimes, you might have a 3-unit setup on a floor, and something like Siren of the Sea can be in the middle, being a damage dealer, but also during Relentless, she stacked up a bunch of health, so your true backliner that might be further back, say in a scenario where we don't find Frenzy Stone for our Sirens, Siren of the Sea is way better in that situation, because she can still be a tank while still providing enough damage that she's probably going to kill a tank still. But then, as I said, in Relentless, she'll take several hits from the boss, whereas Nameless Siren's just going to die. Not only that, I think we've already talked about this, you have to dedicate some sort of defensive slot or essence to this unit to make it work generally, the Nameless Siren, because her only scaling is offense. But all in all, as an offensive unit, she does that pretty well. needs the multi-strike probably. Her essence, as I said, I don't find it as useful as the Siren of the Seas, but it's not a completely bad essence. It's an okay essence, I would say. You can put it on a sweeper and it might work better actually than the Siren of the Sea essence in some cases. That's probably the best situation I would say actually is to put it on a sweeper or like an Animus. A unit that can really dedicate its entire being to be a damage dealer. That's the only thing that really works with this essence. Also worth noting, it's bad into Eelgorgon, whereas Siren of the Seas is great into Eelgorgon. Also, I think I think I mentioned it before. I think the self-infusion for Siren of the Sea is way better than the self-infusion for Nameless. Essence-wise, the lady, I don't ever find I use the reformed essence as well. I think that's worth noting. But yeah, the self-infused Nameless just makes her do more damage. That doesn't really solve any of the issues that are present. It doesn't solve her defensive issues, and it doesn't solve the issue of whether or not you had multi-strike or not. So I do think the self-infusion is not super great on Nameless Siren, but it can work if you did find your multi-strike or whatnot. The next on this list is Morsel Maker. Now, if you're familiar with the difference in the pictures here, Morsel Maker is the 2-cost one that just creates 2 morsels on resolve every turn without you having to do anything. This is one where I feel like it got pretty much a lot better in the DLC. As a unit, it's a pretty good early game unit. You'd be surprised how this unit that seems more like a token, just kind of a token on the floor, you'd be surprised how much just it alone, rings 1 through 3, can be as just a unit that scales itself. It can get up to some pretty good stats, and it can take out as good survivability and damage. Can take out some tanks, can take out the bosses. And if you do get cornered into using Umbra as your main game plan, it's pretty good, especially if Plinks was your starter card, because Plinks are very unreliable morsel generation. So something like a Morsel Maker basically takes care of all of your morsel woes. It's just a little awkward sometimes. Like, if you're trying to combo it with Shadow Eater, for example, you can't draw it out of order, or you can't fit Shadow Eater on the floor. Outside of upgrading Pip, of course, intrinsic Space Prism, there are ways to get around it, but as a baseline, you can't fit them on the floor if they're 3 Pip. Because once you play Morsel Maker, it'll take up 3 Pip the following turn. This is actually one of the ways that it actually got a little more awkward in the DLC, because before you could put Morsel Maker up top, they would be stunned, and you could actually fit the unit on guaranteed. But, all in all, usually you can make that work as your morsel generating solution, and it's probably one of the best to do that with if you need to make a Gorge unit work. And then I think the other reason it's in the B tier is because the essence is just so solid. It's one of the most usable essences in the game. There's literally nothing it would be bad on. Probably the best general essence in the game, actually. If I just said what can work on everything, probably Morsel Maker. 6 is 6 health, 6 attack on resolve. So every turn, it's good in the early game, it's good in the late game. The ceiling isn't really all that great, but it's just a solid infusion, and it should be good on whatever you put it on. It alone isn't going to be enough scaling to win you the game, but it'll certainly help you get there, both offensively and defensively. And in a similar note, here's another unit that on its own is just okay, but its essence is really good, I feel. I actually think, similar to when I said I think the Animus is one of the most underrated essences in the game, I think Animus of Speed is as well. I'm surprised that a lot of people don't seem to like the Animus of Speed essence, which is just it gives a unit quick with no downside at all. To me, that's pretty desirable. I mean, this could just be a playstyle thing. Like, I'm typically, I don't really use Wildenton's sweep or sorry, Wildenton's Predator path as much as a lot of people do. So that could be part of it. Maybe they're just banking on using that or something. But like, I don't know. In a clan that has Animus of Will and 2 sweepers, any one of those 3 units would love to have that quick, you know? And especially the sweepers, I feel. And even outside of the clan, any of these sweepers might like that. You know, quick is just a pretty good defensive essence to have. And I think it is, and I'm somewhat to blame for this because I've always shat on this unit as a unit. I've come to the realization I don't think it's a horrible unit. It's not great, but you know, if I were to compare it to Horned Warrior just straight up as a unit, they're very similar. You know, they're a unit, they're kind of glass cannon, pretty decent starting attack units that get a big shop upgrade as their card text. Now, multi-strike is typically just better, right? So Horned Warrior obviously wins out. But in a similar way that Horned Warrior, even though it's like just sort of objectively worse than Animus of Will, it's still good. I kind of feel it's the same type of situation with Animus of Speed and Horned Warrior. It's like, it's not as good as Horned Warrior, but it's still good. It's still a unit that you can use as your backliner. Quick often is a thing that you want on your backliner. So let's say you do find an early multi-strike along with your Animus of Speed. You can often just put the multi-strike on the Animus of Speed, stick some health on it, and then find some other essence for it, and you'll be good to go. You know, at that point, it's a backliner that has your multi-strike. It's quick, and you put whatever essence makes sense. Maybe you want an extra multi-strike somehow, or maybe you just want some extra scaling. You know, whatever makes sense. And then you're good to go. It's not a bad backliner. So that's why I feel it's B tier. I don't think it's a horrible unit. I don't think it's significantly worse than the big 3 here as a backliner. You know, the 2 sweepers in Awoken and Animus of Will. I think other clans would love to have this card, and its value would shine forth a little bit more. Like, imagine if Umbra just had Animus of Speed. Thematically, it makes no sense. However, then you'd finally have a card you could just stick in your back line and have it be a good backliner, you know? Because literally the only banner units in the Umbra arsenal that can even backline are the 2 morsel-making ones, and they're not good as actual backlining units, right? So they would love to have Animus of Speed. It's just that Animus of Speed comes in the Awoken clan, which has these 3 other units that just sort of steal the show. So I think, you know, in a vacuum, Animus of Speed's pretty good. It's just often you're picking the other units instead. And then the last unit that I'm sticking into the B tier here is the Alloy. I think this unit is very awkward. Very, very awkward. It's good. The ceiling is there. But often you have to set it up mid-floor against Divinity. Really, it comes down to the Divinity why I don't like this unit that much. It just, same as every Gorger, but you can't set up top unless you have a few specific scenarios. And even then, you know, you have to set up mid. It has to be your front liner. So you're taking, at minimum, those double hits from Divinity, which can add up quick on a unit that isn't necessarily that tanky of a unit by design. Also, since you have to set up mid, that's one less turn you have to find morsel generating units and actually gorge, because remember, you have to gorge before you can even attack with this unit, which is another further downside. So, you know, it's 25-25 stats. It's okay. 2 Ember, that's not okay, in my opinion. I think the cost doesn't justify the unit in a lot of cases here. You know, you add everything together, it's like it has to frontline. Its gorge effect is just a downside, right? Like its gorge effect is just like, it'll allow you to attack. Stacking it past a certain point gets you no benefit. So it's not like you know, a big problem with Umbra is like, yeah, they got all these gorge effects, but gorging a bunch to a certain extent doesn't even help you that much. If you look at the uncommon tier here, it doesn't help you at all, actually, other than maybe Shadow Eater. I think that's why Shadow Eater has a slight advantage. A lot of gorges will get you a lot of AoE damage. But, you know, so it's like Alloy needs survivability because it has to frontline. And that survivability has to come in the form of usually like quick, and even quick is often not enough. You probably need damage shield or lifesteal or heals on top of that, because like I said, you're probably going to have to set up mid against Divinity, which has reduced pip, double attacks from Divinity, less time to scale, less time to gorge. There's so many things working against you. It's hard for me to ever put Alloy any higher than B tier because of this. Now, all that being said, it has a pretty good self-infusion. You know, its self-infusion comes with no downside, unlike if you were to infuse its essence into another unit that usually has a downside, because now you have to, you know, gorge that unit to have an attack. But Alloy already has that, so really you're getting a free multi-strike on top of having literally half the need for gorges, or half the need to gorge your unit, because you're getting double gorge fuel effect. So pretty good self-infusion, but the essence isn't necessarily that good beyond that. I think it's okay into Shadow Eater at times. I've definitely used it on Shadow Eater a few times. But that's about it. It's good into Morsel Maid as well. If you find Morsel Maid and Alloy, you should put Alloy into Morsel Maid. You shouldn't do it the other way, because it's just objectively better on the Morsel Maid. And that's the end of the B tier. All of these units, I think, are good candidates to carry a run in one way or another. And now we get to units that often struggle to do that and need specific situations to allow that. So Branded Warrior tops off the C tier here. I think that as a unit, it's lackluster. Not horrible, but just lackluster. Its stats are really bad. And the effect kind of needs you to have good stats. You know what I mean? So it's like, and also it's another one of those units where the essence is good, and it's like, I might as well just use it for the essence onto something that can utilize it better. Something like a Shadow Eater or a Sweeper, or even like a Thorned Hollow, can really make use of Branded Warrior's slay trigger. You know, something that can just slay a bunch. You can do some cute things with it too. Like you can put it on like Endless with the Molting Imp infusion that does 15 AoE damage on summon. Then those slays do count as slay triggers, and you'll get you can basically just use it as an imp, like a kind of like a rage imp at that point. It's not horrible there. But in general, the unit itself, I think, is a little bit lackluster. You can make it work, though. It significantly gets better, of course, if you can find multi-strike. And particularly, I find with Gurg's Goad. That way, the problem, even with multi-strike, it can be awkward because you want it to have quick, and you want it to also have multi-strike. But it starts with 5 health, so you need survivability too. Well, that's 3 things you need, and you usually only have 2 slots to give upgrades for. So Gurg's Goad solves the multi-strike problem, allowing you to take quick and health, which then it becomes a pretty okay unit. But that all screams C tier to me. It's highly situational to get that. In an average scenario, it's not going to be that good of a unit, in my opinion. Even if the essence is good. And this is same kind of story with this unit, First of Kin. I think that it, in a lot of ways, is a well-designed unit if I compare it. Well, we'll get to Demon Fiend later, but it's a much better designed unit than Demon Fiend, but it still isn't that great of a unit. It will absolutely carry your first 3 rings to even 4 rings of combat, but it falls off pretty steeply after that. Its 3 Ember cost and 3 Pip cost together is steep. So outside of specific artifacts such as Forever Flame and Sketches of Salvation, it's a rough unit to make work. It is one of those units that can tank and deal damage. I mean, it will do that pretty comfortably, but you can't really set up top unless you do an Ember upgrade, because unless it's like your only banner unit, because turn 2 you're going to be Ember drained. So without an Ember upgrade or some artifact to support that, you can't play this 3 cost unit now. And also the 3 Pip is, again, as I said, same with Shard Soul Carver, in a clan that is starved for Pip, 3 Pip units just lose out to the smaller units, I feel. The Eggs and the Keeper of Echoes, they're just better. Simply because they have lower Pip. Like, effect-wise, Shard Soul Carver and First Akin probably have better effects, But are they that much better to justify an entire extra Pip? That I don't know. Now, I will say First of Kin has a very underrated essence. If you have any sort of consume return mechanics, either through Echo Right or Broken Memory Spell Chain / Consume Removed, or Wormkin etchings, this will be a very high value essence for whatever damage dealer you have. 5 per consume played on the floor can add up pretty quick in the right deck. And even without consume returns, some decks you could have a weird deck that just has ambient charge as part of its game plan, or even like a returned soul, which is probably more realistic, like a holdover returned soul. You're getting a pretty good amount of damage guaranteed each turn out of that, so it's a pretty good essence in that case. But like I said, as a unit, 3 Ember, 3 Pip, it falls off by late game because of how much it costs to get going, and you're suffering in the way of like, now you can't play like a Ritual of Battle or something else that actually costs some Ember or whatnot in order to play this unit, which often is just too awkward to actually consistently make work in any meaningful way. And the next unit on this list is a unit that I liked a lot prior to the DLC, and it's significantly fallen off for me post-DLC. Units that just tank and don't do anything else, I think, are a lot less useful now in the DLC. Dedicating floor space to something that doesn't help you kill anything is a tough ask, especially against these Divinity waves where you have these overcharged tank waves that are just stupid. And even just the fact that a lot of the damage is just in the form of sweeping these days. So a dude in front is basically just delaying you until like a relentless round or something like that. So I feel like the ceiling just isn't there with this guy, and even the floor isn't necessarily great. But if it is a dedicated frontliner tank that you need, he might be the best at it. I just think the need for a dedicated frontline tank that doesn't do anything else other than tank is a very low need in the DLC, and a low value use of even just 2. It's only 2 pip, but even the 2 pip, it's a low value use of that 2 pip on your floor. But like I said, it's probably the best tank, pure tank in the game. Assuming you have an incant deck, of course. It will scale pretty crazily. Self-infuse is fine. Its essence, I think, could be better. I kind of wish the essence did the full effect. I'm fine with the Sirens having their essences nerfed to like what they are now, but I feel like the Guard's essence, it should be better than the Merchant of Steel essence. I think it could stand to be buffed to 3 for the essence, but that's neither here nor there. It might not change the whole value of the unit that much. And then the next one, I don't know. Lately, I've been actually liking Thorned Hollow. but that could just be the variance. I will say there's two particular essences that can turn this into a pretty good unit. Shadow Eater, because it's just gives you 10 health on Gorge, but that's actually pretty good for Thorn Hollow. Now big problem with Thorn Hollow is you just often can't get to the spikes needed fast enough to deal with Divinity Waves, or just late game sharded up waves in general. But with something that can give you so many extra heal procs, now you can get there. You could even add in the Shard Channeler, which I usually hate, but even then it can become a unit that quickly starts handling Divinity Waves. And then it also has a ton of health. They've upgraded the health on this unit, so it's actually a really good tank. Even if you don't get that essence, I think it still isn't D tier, because as a tank, the only thing that really sucks about it is that it's 3 pip. Generally, you're going to find a way to heal it with Awoken, even if it's not like a high amount of Cultivate procs, or sorry, Rejuve procs. You might still just find one big heal that can bring its health total up to what its max is, and its max health total is huge. So as a tank, the only thing holding it back really is the fact that it's 3 pip. If it were 2 pip, I might even just bump it up to B or A. But at 3 pip, it is, it's a lot to dedicate to a floor if it's not going to be doing a crazy amount of spikes damage. It also gets pretty hard countered by the Chaste, of course, which is always fun. And the other essence, I've already mentioned it, but the Branded Warrior essence is pretty good. When you kill a unit with spikes, it counts as a slay. So, it just can really scale your backliner or backliners, depending on. Even if it's only, killing the lower health units like Shadelings and Lightwings and Wiltwings, it's still a pretty good amount of rage to the floor. And then this next unit, I think would be D tier, but I think the essence is so good on this unit that it deserves a C tier. It's probably the most lifted up, other than Morsel Maker, by its essence than any other unit on this list. It does cost a pip, so it's not like it's not necessarily non-awkward to make the essence work, but you think about we've already gone over Shadow Eater, but even just like the sweepers can get really scaled up by this essence of the Alpha Fiend. Every unit hit by the sweep counts as a strike. So if there's, say, a Divinity floor where there's 5 units in the wave plus Divinity, just a single hit will have gotten you, what is that? That's 6 times 5, so 30 attack just from a single hit. And if you're multi-striking, it'd be 60, assuming that it might be a little lower depending on if the Wiltwing and the Channeler die from that, which probably they will. But, roughly, if you're multi-striking, it's like 50 to 60 attack in that wave that you just gained. And every wave, it just keeps stacking and stacking and stacking. So it's such a good essence. Even an Animus of Will benefits from it. Minimum 15 attack you're getting. More if you multi-strike more. I don't know. It's just pretty good. Obviously isn't that useful on any single striking unit. I think it's even okay on a Horned Warrior. I mean, I've used it on Horned Warrior before to decent effect, even without an extra multi-strike. Just the 10 attack a turn is still a lot of scaling each turn. I mean, if you think about it, Morsel Maker's a pretty good one, right? And it just does 6 attack each turn. 6 health as well, but this one, you'd get 10 attack a turn. That's still pretty good. So yeah, it's just a really good essence. It as a unit though sucks. 2 Ember, 3 Pip for horrible stats, and it's like an example of the worst unit that you'd want to put the essence on. It's bad stats, it takes up a lot of Pip, it costs a lot of Ember, it only strikes once. Nothing about this unit itself makes you want to have this this strike effect on it. So as a unit, you're in a rough spot if you actually have to use the unit. Not even a good self-infusion, I would say. Now it's too fat already. And then this is a unit I could concede really comes down to play style. It's probably worthy of many tiers higher. I just don't use the unit, Wickless Tycoon. I just don't value a unit with pretty poor stats that's just going to give me a bunch of gold, because I'd rather just have my unit locked in, like a good unit locked in, rather than having this unit. I think the stats aren't good enough to even say that it's like a good early game unit. Like something like the First of Kin or the Shard Soul Carver really can shine in that early game, and then you just use it for its infusion later on, whereas the Wickless Tycoon doesn't really shine early game. It'll get you gold early game, assuming you can get those harvests. But like I said, I'm bad at harvest play in general, so maybe that's part of it as well. And I don't know. I don't think the essence is that great, but I'm willing to be proven wrong on that. It's probably an okay essence. I just don't use it. I don't like the unit. I don't like the essence. I don't think the unit is bad. This is more of just a playstyle thing. So I think everything I've listed up till now obviously has playstyle biased into it, but I feel like I've given good reasons for why a unit is in any particular tier, whereas with the Wickless Tycoon, I can't really do that. All I can really tell you is that D tier feels wrong because I know the unit is good and I know a lot of good players use this unit to good effect. I just don't use the unit, so for me, it's kind of defaulting down to the bottom of C tier here because I just don't use it. And in a similar vein, same deal with Paraffin Enforcer. I think the stats suck. It's a little bit worse than Wickless Tycoon because you actually have to get a Slay, which is a lot harder than getting a... Oh, did I say Paraffin Enforcer? Paraffin Thug. Sorry. Sorry, Paraffin Enforcer. I don't... I need to be banished for saying that. But yeah, Paraffin Thug. But yeah, as I was saying, it needs slays. It's hard to get, especially on a unit that's similar to Branded Warrior, which doesn't have good stats. So, I don't know. I don't love it. I've used it. I've probably used this more than Tycoon, but I think Tycoon is a better unit. I don't see too many people sing the praises of Paraffin Thug. Again, though, pre-DLC, I used Paraffin Thug a lot. It was actually one of my go-to backliners. It is funny how far it actually fell for me, I feel. But all that being said, I think it's similar to the Tycoon. I think it's technically probably still an okay unit. I just don't use it. If I'm playing Wormkin, it's always going to be Paraffin Enforcer if I can manage it. If not, if it's for some reason no reform, no burnout extension, or I just didn't see Paraffin Enforcer, next on the list is going to be Wickless Tycoon. If not that, then either of the ladies. These are my last choices at Uncommon tier. And in fact, when I have a run where Ring 2 banner choices are Wickless Tycoon and Paraffin Thug, I die a little inside. It just doesn't seem good to me when that happens. But, I usually just take the Tycoon in that case. So that's C tier. All of these units are still units that are situationally not going to be shit. No, honestly, all of these units can still be great. But often they aren't. Now we get to the D tier. Just to reiterate, in case you didn't listen to the intro and you're a new player, take everything I say down in the C and D tier with a grain of salt. This is just me saying I've never found use for these units typically. It's not set in stone that they're bad. Can totally just be a playstyle thing. Pay more attention to the S and A tier because I can at least vouch that I know that those were able to get me high win rates. So the first unit on D tier is probably the only unit. I don't know. None of the D tier. I'm not excited ever to see anything in the D tier. Or the C tier, really. But really, the D tier is just like poop. Morsel Master. I really wish that this unit was not a banner unit and instead was just. I wish that this unit was switched with Emberforge. And I wish Emberforge was buffed up to be a proper banner unit. And be also one that wasn't integrated at all with the Gorge plan. Have one that really just is meant for the Ember Drain plan. Like, rework that unit entirely. I think then you might be more enticed to go to the Ember banners, but that's neither here nor there. It probably will never happen, so I'm just talking to the wind, so to speak. As it stands, this as a banner unit is not at all, in my opinion, worth a priority draw. Its effect just doesn't justify a priority draw and a pip space, in my opinion. If you have enough morsel generation that Morsel Master makes sense, then my argument is that Morsel Master doesn't make sense. You might as well, like, say it's an alloy that you're needing to fuel, and you don't have many turns to get that thing fueled before the waves get to you, especially if they're hasted, especially if you're setting up mid against Divinity. You don't have time to fuck around and find out if you're going to draw alloy turn 1 or not. You need to draw it turn 1. You don't need to draw Morsel Master turn 1. And also, let's say you did just draw both. The ideal scenario, you just draw both the same turn. Cool. Well, that's still 3 Ember. Unless you made an Ember upgrade, and unless you have 0 cost morsel generation, you can't even generate morsels that turn because it costs an Ember to put this Morsel Master down. Now, if you just didn't have the Morsel Master and you just had your morsel generating cards, you could just put your morsels down and already get fueled, guaranteed turn 1. And then every turn thereafter, if you have enough, because here's the thing, you only have so much pip space. If you have a proper morsel deck, you're probably filling up the pip space regardless of if you had a Morsel Master or not. And on top of that, you're limited to 7 units anyway. A lot of the time, you'll just get to that 7 unit limit purely with 6 morsels and whatever unit you're gorging. You couldn't do that with a Morsel Master. A Morsel Master takes up a slot, so in that case you even gorge less because you have a unit that's not a morsel taking up pip or taking up a unit slot on that floor. And then its stats aren't good either, so it just sucks, I think. Now I will say it's at the top of D tier simply because it does have some niche scenarios completely unrelated to its morsel effect where it can be useful. There's 2 of them. First is Firelight. Why is it useful there? For the simple fact that it is a priority draw unit and it has only 1 pip that it takes up. You can make a few of these. Firelight loves to have 1 pip units. That just means you can build a really wide floor and you can buff them all up. You just get that many more procs of Firelight. So it's good for Firelight, and in a similar sense, it's good for Corruptor Spine Chief. Corruptor is a fat unit, but it has a huge effect. So if you have priority units that are just 1 pip, Morsel Master is great for that. So that's the only reason it gets to the top of D tier. As the actual intended effect of this unit, I think it's horrible. Now the next unit, and also I think the essence is crap. I think the essence is pretty much the only thing it would ever make sense on is Morsel Maid. That's about it. So the next unit, this is the one I think out of all my D tier choices, probably I could see not deserving of D tier. I simply never play the unit. I tried it out a few times early on, and I've been too afraid. I had such bad experiences with it that I've been too afraid to really try it again while I'm trying to go for these win streaks. once I lose, I'm sure I'll lose soon. I doubt I'm getting to 100. I've come close to losing a lot, so we'll see. But once I do, I'm going to open myself more back up to experimenting, and I do want to give another shot to Kinos Carapace. I could see this maybe being an okay card. My reasons, though, for the D tier are, like I said, I just do not use it. And my experiences were pretty poor with it. It was like, it costs 2 Ember. It has to get drawn after your other units, or else it will hog all the pip on the floor. So it's like, it seemed very niche. Like, it's good with Cheater's Hand, I'll give it that. But without Cheater's Hand, and without a way to like guarantee you can permafrost it or something, I think it's pretty bad. It'd be a lot better if it didn't balloon its pip when you put it down, but the fact that it does that doesn't really justify the stat gain, in my opinion. It really limits what you can do with the unit, because, you know, if you're dedicating all of these echoes to one floor early on, it just doesn't work out often. It's similar to Glug Slider, I guess. Like, I think that if there's anybody in the world that can consistently make Glug Slider work, then I assume you can probably consistently make this unit work as well. You know, Intrinsic Soul Siphon and whatnot, but I don't know. What I'd like to play around with it would be maybe just, is it consistent if I play it as more of a, like, I cycle through my deck once and then play it? That's what I am curious. I never really played around with that. If it's pretty good with that, I could see it maybe being more worth. But, you know, until further notice, it's D tier for me. And then we get to, there should probably be an F tier for the next 3 units. They're significantly just the worst units in the game. We're going to go with Collector first. This is the most crestfallen unit, DLC to post-DLC unit, in my opinion. This would have been in my S tier pre-DLC, Crucible Collector. This is the one that gains lifesteal on Gorge. This unit just guaranteed your relentless combats, while also just kind of being okay. You know, you didn't have to deal with these gigantic divinity waves pre-DLC, and you also didn't have to deal with a sweeping fucker top floor. Typically, the game plan with Crucible Collector was put him top floor, feed him morsels every now and then, or even just stick a morsel maker behind him, and you can kill everything else with your other units. It was a great 2-floor setup type unit, 2 to 3 floor setup unit, and then it would just handle relentless. Now it can't really do any of that consistently. It's like, it needs both enough health to survive an entire set of large damage coming in. That could be from anything in the game too, by the way. You know, the sharded up world just wrecks this unit. You know, the Ring 5 multi-strike boss, if you're sharded up, will pretty much delete this unit. You need enough health to survive all of the crazy attack that it has, but you also need enough damage to actually lifesteal back and keep on surviving. And those are both of those are actually pretty tall orders, and the payoff just isn't there, because the only payoff there is surviving relentless. Relentless, in my experience, isn't really the big problem in the DLC. Sometimes it's what gets you, but in my experience, just waves of tanks leaking through, or like some sharded up backliner leaking through, is what kills you. And both of these Crucible doggos just help not at all with that. They don't help at all with that. And then, like I said, even as a relentless solution, they aren't great at it. But I still say Collector's better than Warden. I might ruffle a few feathers here. I think even pre-DLC, Warden was a bad unit. I've never thought Warden was good. I think his stacking damage shield is significantly worse than stacking lifesteal to like a pretty big degree, I would say. But in the DLC, Collector has fallen so much that Warden is about the same. It has all the same issues. Like, well, it doesn't have the same issues. Like, you don't need to have a bunch of health stacked up on Warden, and you don't need to have a bunch of damage stacked up on Warden. But it all doesn't matter because you're either clearing the waves or you're not, and Crucible Warden doesn't help with that at all. So, like, if you're clearing all the waves such that you can somehow stack a bunch of damage shield on Warden and have it stick, I'd argue you probably didn't need Warden anyway. So it's really a win more unit, I feel. It just doesn't do anything for you. On top of that, I don't even think they're that good early game anymore, especially if you got Plinks. But, you know, I also don't think the essences are very good. I will say also, the Kinhos Carapace essence is good for endless eggs. It's very good for endless eggs. It's probably the ideal one for endless eggs. But it's also just good on eggs. Like I said, it's a 20/20 worth of stats. So the floor of it for eggs is okay, and the ceiling is very great. For every other unit, I think it's a useless infusion. Theoretically, if you had an endless unit that could come back a lot or just get reformed a lot, it should be good on that. But in practice, I've never experienced that. So, you know, all 4 essences here, the only one that's decent is the Kinhost Carapace, I think. I think the Doggo infusions are very bad. Some people swear by them. I'm not on board with that, but it is worth noting that there are some people that swear by them, so you can try that out for yourself. I could just be wrong on that. In my experience, though, very minimal stats for the infusion for a very minimal just initial a very minimal initial buff. I'd rather just get something that scales or gives me better stats initially. Speaking of Demon Fiend, now technically it should probably go like here, but on principle alone, I'm putting Demon Fiend at the very bottom because I hate the design of this unit. I've hated it before the DLC, I hate it after the DLC. It is uncommon, so you see it often enough that just seeing a unit that you can't play for really not even that much of a benefit, like, you know, you just have to add an Ember to really be able to play it outside of, you know, the high roll artifact situations and stuff. The payoff just sucks because it's like, take Lady of the House, for example. Like I said, it's a really good ring 1 through 3 unit because it just comes with stats. But it doesn't have any card text beyond that, other than the burnout, of course. Similarly, Demon Fiend, there's no card text. It just has stats. When is the best time in the game for a card to just have stats? Around the like 50-50 type stats. You know, we're not talking like Shadow Siege level stats. Well, rings 1 through 3. When do you get this card offered? Well, rings 1 through 3. When can you not play this card? Oh, rings 1 through 3. Yeah, this unit I hate. I fucking hate it. Realistically, you know, Sketches and Volatile Gauge and even Forever Flame runs should really put it above these if I was really ranking accurately, but again, on principle alone, because I hate the design of this card, I'm putting it at the end. It's just so bad. And technically, its infusion is probably the best of all the D tier infusions, but I'm still not going to bump it up above anything other than last. He should be damn thankful I didn't create a new tier just for it. But for the record, its infusion is okay. It's like a Large Stone that's a little bit better than Large Stone. You sacrifice a lot of the health that Large Stone provides to get double the damage. Damage is typically more useful in this game than health. So paying a pip to get kind of a better Large Stone is generally an okay deal for a unit like, say, an Animus of Will or a Horned Warrior. Some of the sweepers might like it too. But it's not like a god tier infusion by any means. And that's the only thing it's useful for, is its infusion. It's not even one of these units like Shard Soul Carver or First of Kin where you can take them and have them do good things early game and then later use their useful essences as infusions. This one, you take it and you either can use the essence or not. You're not going to be able to play the fucking unit. So I really hate this unit. I think it should just be reworked. Either bring it to 3 and leave the stats the same. I swear to God, it wouldn't even be that good of a unit then. Or just rework it entirely. But that closes it out here. Like I said, I'll have the links in the description to check this out, and also if you want to make your own, have at it. I always think it's fun to do these, and let me know if you have any big disagreements or if there's any surprises that you saw here. Always love the discussion that comes from these things. As always, thanks for watching, and until next time, peace.